So my name is Alexi James. I'm going to be introducing your next speaker. I represent Oracle Primavera. We're a sponsor here. We don't have a booth outside, so if you want to chit chat, just find me. I've got business cards. Primavera handles all of Oracle's project management solutions, and we're glad to be here. But moving on to our next speaker, Lisa Slonim. She's the Director of Enterprise Program and Portfolio Management at Lowe's. She has over 20 years of project, program, and portfolio management experience. Lisa's background is diverse, to say the least. Working at startups, small and large businesses, Fortune 100 companies, technology, consulting, insurance, finance, and retail industries. These experiences have given Lisa a unique perspective and insight into program and project challenges, along with the various ways organizations can successfully manage and deliver on initiatives. Lisa is originally from New Jersey and moved to Charlotte area to manage a large Y2K project. And before joining Lowe's, she was a senior manager at the North Highland Company. So if you guys could help me welcome Lisa. It's all yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon. How's everybody doing today? It's like a really big room, so and I feel like I'm like trapped behind the podium. So yeah, I've about 20 years. I started when I was like 5 managing projects, so at least I like to feel that way sometimes. Yeah, and I, coming from New Jersey, when somebody said, "Hey, move to North Carolina," I'm like, "What, are you crazy?" But this was in 1998. But I came, managed a Y2K project, successfully engineered myself right out of a job. Everything was successful, which was awesome, and then decided to stay. So I've been here since then. I've gotten married, started a family. I live up at the lake, which is fantastic because now I work at Lowe's, so my commute is awesome. Because I like to, that work-life balance situation. So they asked me to come speak to everybody today about project portfolio management, and we are kind of at the end of the day. It's always kind of tough to follow a highly carbed lunch and that awesome keynote speaker we had during lunch. So I've got a lot of slides because that's what we do, right? Lots of slides and a lot of talking points. But if you have questions or I don't have any like fun interactive type activities, but if you have anything you want to add or ask, please feel free. I don't have all the answers, but hopefully I have some that can help you out. Is this working? Yeah. Okay. So kind of want to level set kind of what we're going to talk about today and make sure that this is something that you're all interested in and you're in the right room. So we're going to talk about project portfolio management, what it is, why it's important. I think it's very important. It's what I do. Kind of creating that project portfolio, managing it, because you can create it, then there's managing it, and then how to be effective when you're managing it, and understanding where you are on a maturity model curve. We see so many folks really embracing portfolio management and then trying to kind of zip to the top from a maturity model and then are really confused why things aren't successful. So kind of talk through those different kind of phases and iterations and how we can continuously improve our processes. Tools, everybody loves to jump to tools. How many projects have you been on where the first thing they did was buy a tool? We love tools. So tools are great, but tools can also be not so great. So we're going to talk a little bit about how they can be helpful and how they can also hurt if you're not prepared for them. Some common challenges to adoption. We want to make sure that people are following our processes, and then some key takeaways. So as we go through these topics, I'm sure some thoughts may be going through your head, like, that'll never work on my company. I don't know what she's talking about. That's just crazy. I know I've sat in those seats, so I know how that goes. Or you may be sitting there thinking, well, my organization is super special. We're different. Well, of course you are, right? Everybody's different and special, but you're also a lot the same. So the one thing I hope that you guys can take away from this is at least one learning, something new, something that you can kind of bring back to your team, to your organization, and start thinking about portfolio management if you're not already doing it, and if you are, how you can kind of move yourself up that kind of maturity curve. So let's first start with definitions, because I want to make sure everybody's kind of grounded in the same thing. What is a portfolio? What is portfolio management? I'm not going to read all the slides because they're like way up there, but just to kind of give you that basic concept that a portfolio is just the aggregation of things that are going on in your environment. It's projects, it's programs, it could be enhancements, functional activities. Those are your portfolio items you're looking at, things that are going to come together and help you achieve your strategy or business benefits. And portfolio management is kind of that centralized management of that portfolio to ensure that you're achieving those goals, because we always want to make sure we're driving towards something. So this is a quote from PMI. Really, if you want to look at it a different way, projects, if you're looking at all the projects you're doing, it's going to tell you what your company's doing today, project after project after project. If you're looking at a portfolio, it should be showing you, it should be that articulation of strategy, whether it's a business unit strategy, a functional area strategy, or a corporate strategy. It should be that articulation of that strategy. And if it's not, we'll talk about that in a little bit, that could indicate a problem. So what's the value of project portfolio management, and should organizations invest in this discipline? I mean, it's a good question. My answer is yes, but you really need to start asking some of those questions before you jump into portfolio management. We really want to ensure that we're enabling an organization's alignment to our strategic benefits and goals. If your projects don't align, then you're really not managing. You're managing a portfolio, but it's not going to take you anywhere. And you need to have some insight into some of the things that are going to build into your portfolio. And some questions that your organization should be asking, or you guys should be asking, is what we're doing aligned to our strategy? Do we know what our strategy is? Who sets the strategy? Who makes those decisions? So those are the questions that, if you don't know the answers to, might be some probing and prodding that you can do to help get some of those answers. And then once you have those answers, then we get into some of those lower levels. Are we making the best use of our resources? What's our capacity as an organization to do these kinds of things? And then how are we monitoring and measuring what it is we're actually doing? So those are some of those questions. Maybe even more telling is if your organization hasn't even started to ask these questions, and that can help you understand where you are on kind of a continuum from a maturity model. So another way to think about it, I always like to frame things in ways people can hopefully relate. Most of us should have, or most of us will have some sort of financial investments, whether it's 401k or personal investments. And we plan for investments. We generally think in terms of short-term, mid-range, and long-term goals. And what do we want to do with our financial investments? So some of the things we may think about are paying off debt, where you want to go on vacation. My kids want to go to Disney World. I want to go to the beach, and I'm trying to tell them it's cheaper to go to the beach than Disney World. We're working through that. Got to put in a plug for Lowe's. Kitchen remodel, awesome. Should absolutely do that, save for that. Kids want to go to college. How are we going to pay for that? Or maybe we want to go back to school. How are we going to pay for that? And then ultimately, retirement. Definitely want to retire. So we want to think about, we think about our personal finances that way. And when we're thinking through some of those goals and how we get there, we're thinking about how do we select our investments. We need to not only understand the goals, but how risk adverse or how risk friendly are we? And that's going to help drive our investment decisions. So we're asking ourselves a lot of the questions that our companies should be asking themselves as well. And a lot of it goes back to how much money, right? My kids want to go to Disney World, but I'm telling them that costs a lot of money. Do I have that money to do that? You may want to, I wanted a dream kitchen, and my husband's like, that's not going to happen. This is not our forever house. We don't want to price ourselves out of the neighborhood. So you're looking at all of your different goals. So his goal was to keep us so we could resell our house. My goal was like this ultimate, like I could be on TV kitchen. So you have to look at what those goals are and understand how you're going to get there. So some of those investment vehicles are high risk, and if you've ever worked on a project or a program, you know that some of the things you're working on are probably high risk, right? There's maybe a lot of value if you deliver it, but it could be kind of risky. Same thing with your finances. So you want to aim for that balance so that you're not putting all your eggs in the proverbial one basket. You're not just putting everything in the high risk, high reward category, or everything, if you're super safe, everything in that low risk, low reward, but getting that balance. And if anyone employs a financial advisor, they would likely give you similar advice. And it also depends on where you are, stage of life. You're in a startup company or a young person, your risk profile is going to look a lot different than if you're little older in life or a more established company, your brand reputation, some of those other things. So we can think about project portfolio management the same way, just like we do our personal finances. What are our business unit and corporate goals and strategies? I feel like I'm going to say, just so you guys know, corporate goals and strategies a lot, because if you don't know what those are, you're going to have a really hard time understanding the value you're getting out of your portfolio. But you also need to understand what those things are your company or your business unit or functional area wants to achieve. Again, in that short term, what are things we need to do now? Maybe it's keep the lights on or do some product upgrades or enhancements, or we've got some compelling compliance thing that we need to align to, or there's something in the marketplace we need to quickly address. What are our midterm goals and what are our long-term goals, and how do we get there as a company? And then what are the priorities? And we'll talk a little bit later about priorities and how priorities can be derived. What are those priorities of your company? And again, how do you know? Does everybody know what their company's goals are? Okay, that's the first question you should be asking. If you don't know, and I'm going to point to Ed, should know what our goals are. So you should always know what our strategic. He's a fellow Loweser, so I can call on him. Lowe's person. No, it's not that. So we should always know what your goals are, right? And if you don't, you should start asking those questions, because people are going to come to you and say, what's all this stuff we're doing? We got all these projects. And you're like, yeah. And you've got competing priorities, and everyone's got the guy, I call him the idea hamster. Like every day he's got a new great idea. Like he's on the wheel every day, and they're all great ideas. And you don't know which one to look at. And if you're looking at it from a bottoms-up perspective, if you're the project practitioner, it's really challenging, and I'm sure you guys feel this, hopefully not on a day-to-day basis, but it becomes really challenging because your priorities constantly change. You've got this new idea, this new thing, this new project that's come up, and if you're sitting in the PMO and the program office or the project office, you're seeing all these new things come down, and you're looking at your resources and what they're working on, and you're not sure how to allocate them. And from a top-down perspective, from a portfolio perspective, if every new idea is good and we don't know how we're aligning, it's going to be very challenging to know what we should be working on, what should we be spending our money, our resources, et cetera, on. So those are just some of those things to start thinking about as you're thinking about portfolio management. So along with strategy goals, those are kind of our big picture items. There's some lower level things that we all should be thinking about, whether you're a project, program, or portfolio. It's what are resources and capacity constraints? And resources and capacity are two totally different things. If you think about resources, it's like your people. Capacity is the organization's ability to actually do stuff. So if we look at, I may have 100 developers in one space, but the system only allows so many changes at the same time. So our capacity to make changes in that system is very low. Or I may have a lot of marketing changes that need to happen. Let's think about our customers. What's their capacity to take on all of those changes? If we're constantly putting new change out in the marketplace for them, are they going to even understand what we're doing as a company, and what's that going to do to our brand and reputation? So I just want to always try to separate capacity from resources. Risk tolerance. Again, where are we on a risk tolerance? We may be feeling pretty good and we want to kind of stretch out there. There's some new ideas and new things we want to do as a company. We may have gotten burned by a great new idea, so our risk tolerance may be kind of lowered a little bit as we throttle back and say, let's get some basic things out into the marketplace. And then budgets. Budgets change sometimes like the wind, right? You feeling flush, feeling not so flush. And what are your budgets? What are your CapEx? What are your budget for external, for internal resources, for new software acquisitions? All of those things need to be taken into account, because your projects, your projects are investments, right? And if you think about it from a company perspective, I'm not an accountant, but they are investments. You're investing company money to deliver something, and you're taking a hedge, right? Is it going to work? Is it going to not? And what's the value that's going to be delivered at the end? So why is this important? By looking across that project portfolio, that gives that organization a really good opportunity to balance that risk. It gives them that good opportunity to say, yeah, I want to put our neck out on these couple of things, but we need to bet on some sure things as well. We need to shore up our infrastructure. If we don't shore up that infrastructure, we can never do these risky projects later. So let's invest here. or we've got a lot of customer complaints in this space. Let's kind of look at our balance and ensure we're caring for those complaints. Hey, the government's breathing down our back, right? We're going to be in the news. Let's make sure we're balancing those things out. All of those things, those are levers that that can be pulled as you're looking at what your portfolio is going to look like. And that's also what your leadership is looking at. What are their goals? What are they being incented by? And what are the things that are keeping them up at night? That's going to help with that portfolio risk, or that portfolio management as well. Shiny objects, cool new things always happen. I've never worked in any organization where there hasn't been a skunk works project going on, somebody who's that idea hamster, that super strategic thinker that's always coming up with new stuff. Those things happen all the time. And in my experience, which is not everywhere, is that the more you try to squash those things down, or I don't want to hear about it, the more they're going to happen. And if you're looking at it from a day-to-day project management perspective, or even a PMO perspective, that's noise, it's distraction for your people and yourselves. But from a portfolio perspective, you want to know that those things are going on. So you can look at it from a very fact-based way to say, okay, here's why this is not happening. So we've got this stuff going on over here, and here's the risk, here's the impact, but also there could be some benefit from that going on as well. So you always want to know everything that's going on, because you're not going to stop it, but it's always good to give that full portfolio view of what's going on. So kind of back to some definitions. We get really confused sometimes with our P words. We have project management, we have program management, we have portfolio management. Sometimes we wear 3 hats at the same time, which can be very challenging. Sometimes we're wearing none of these hats. We're doing some other operational activities. I didn't make this up. This came from our friends at Gartner. So really, as you're looking at it, and also I think it helps me a lot when I sit down with some of my peers in other areas in the organization, or with some of my leaders, for them to understand the difference, the differentiation, and the value that each of these disciplines provides. One is not better than the other. One does not necessarily become a career path. I've had this conversation with folks on my team and just in the industry. You don't have to be a project manager and then become a program manager and then become a portfolio manager. We have a lot of project managers that are really good at being project managers and probably would not be really good at being a portfolio manager. We have some folks that, and I would say you have to kind of work your way up. I wouldn't stick somebody in a portfolio management role that has no idea what a project is, because that's a recipe for disaster. But these are not, it is not a career path that you have to go from one to the other. We have great program managers that's all they want to do. So if you have any influence in your company, try to make those career paths so someone can stay in that discipline or move up if they so choose. And if you look at it, it's just that balance. Your project management, they're really focused on those day-to-day, those tactical, those delivery. They're out there fighting those fires. They're really getting down into those details, because their focus is to deliver on those projects. And they're pulling everything they can together to get those projects delivered. So they're really focusing on the individual risk, their skills. They absolutely have to have those leadership skills, but they're really focused, and their contacts are generally within that project space. Your program manager is a little more broad, and some of their skills you're wanting to have are maybe a little bit different, some more change management skills. When I talk about change management, it's not change control and CR type change, but it's your organizational change. What is the impacts? What's happening? And they're going to be looking more holistically across a group of projects together and looking across those interdependencies. Your portfolio managers, they really need to be able to take a step back and be agnostic to the work that's going on, and be able to see the facts, kind of the forest through the trees, and understand what all those impacts are, what's going on, and be able to have those fact-based conversations and communicate both upwards to leadership as well as downwards into those individual programs and projects. So it is good to know that differentiation, and it's good. I use this a lot when I talk to leaders. They're like, I don't understand the difference. This kind of helps them when they're looking at what do they want and what are those things that they need from a value position. So just kind of real quickly, if you're in project portfolio management, don't try to run all the projects. You can't do it, right? And that's not your job. Leave that to the project manager, the program managers. That's what they're there for, and you need them. They're the foundation. We would never have portfolio management without those project managers getting their work done. From a portfolio management perspective, you're really looking at that holistic view. I say here it does involve choosing the projects. I'll be fully transparent. I sit in a portfolio management organization. We don't choose the projects. But what we do is, if we were purists, we'd say we'd pick all this stuff based on all this criteria. We don't. And a lot of companies don't have that view because leadership still wants to say, here's what we're going to do. But what we can do is be that the fact-based providers of information, because I don't have skin in anybody's game. I have skin in everybody's game. So we're looking at it holistically to understand what are the measures, what's the risks, what's the value, what are the business cases, what are intent, who's our sponsors, pulling all of that together. And are we delivering expected value, and what do we do about that if we are and if we aren't? Everybody still awake? Sorry, I know it's like after lunch. And so if we look at it, people like pictures, right? And it's always good to show a hierarchy. You can have, as we know, we can have projects. You sometimes have projects within projects. Programs have projects. Programs have programs. Same thing with portfolios. Portfolios can have portfolios within them. And also the way we look at things may be different. I sit in an organization where we have an enterprise view. So I look over business and technology. A lot of organizations focus a lot of this energy in the technology space. So you can have within even your technology space the different slicing and dicing of how you want to look at your portfolios. We look at it holistically, and everything should have a business case and a business value, but there's technology involved. So we're looking at our technology portfolio. How does that roll up to our overall business portfolio? What are our different business units? There's a supply chain portfolio. There's an operations portfolio, and how all those roll up together is really kind of where you get into those nuances and complexity. So now that we all know what a project portfolio is, and if you did already, thank you for humoring me and taking us through here. It's now, how do we go and create one? So intake, everybody hates intake, right? Got to fill out a form, and it's a pain. But we wouldn't know what to take and what to do if we didn't have some form of intake. There are so many different ways to do intake. I'm not even going to sit here and try to tell you that what we do is the best way or what somebody else does. It's whatever fits for your organization, and you're going to find what fits your organization today probably isn't going to fit 6 months or a year from now. But really, the things you want to look at, or I would recommend you look at when you're talking about intake, is it should not just be the name of the project. Here's what I want to do. Fantastic. Okay, tell me a little more. Tell me more about that. I work with a guy who, before he's actually in change management, organizational change management. Before he came into that role, he was actually a private psychologist. So whenever he talks to sponsors about their projects to try to really get into the intent, he always says, "So tell me a little bit more about that. Can you tell me?" So I always feel like I'm on the couch when I'm telling about my project, but it's a really good point, is you really want to understand what is this that you're taking in, and how do you even know what to do with it if you don't have some more of that information. Looking at what is how often do you want to intake? I've worked in organizations where we had intake open all the time, and we were just constantly taking new stuff in. I've worked in organizations where we had intake quarterly, annually, you name it. It's, again, whatever works for you. I would say the more frequently you take things, you can take things in all the time. It's what you do with it. You can take things in on a daily basis, which is great if you can have the staff to review and analyze. But I would say don't be putting that back out to your project teams on a daily basis, because you're never going to get anything done.
What I found was also you have to set the expectations from the person who's providing it.
Yep.
We run into the problem all the time is they hand you off that document and they think you're starting it.
Absolutely. I don't know if everyone here has a question. It's truly that expectation setting. Somebody, if you have intake weekly, right, or monthly or quarterly, there is an expectation from leadership. This went through intake. It should start next week, right? And the answer is generally no, unless it's a compliance or regulatory type item and the dollar signs are racking up. That's when the all hands on deck for those types of things. And a lot of those things probably don't even go through your intake. It's an emergency. You're doing it. And then as a portfolio manager, you're looking at now how does this impact the rest of the stuff I'm doing? But it's really around those expectation settings. So a lot of companies do it annually. There's been a lot of articles and commentary out there recently, kill the annual planning cycle. It is very painful if you've been through it. It serves a purpose. There's lots of alternative ways to do it. But if you're kind of still in this, the annual planning cycle, it's setting those expectations, Because the last thing you want to do is, okay, annual planning is going to kick off in a month, and now everybody's trying to get all their stuff put together, and your whatever group does your business cases or whatever group does your estimating, they're going to be freaking out because you're all coming to them at the same time. So it says, yeah, think about things all year round, this is when we intake it. Or think about things all the time, we intake it quarterly. And then when you're going to report out, what does the portfolio look like? That cadence needs to be clearly communicated as well. Because I may get, okay, so I'm going to submit this, it's going to be reviewed quarterly, then what? So then first day of the next quarter it's starting, right? It's making sure you're having that communication and your cadence. And being selective about what goes in the portfolio is not a bad thing. As long as you have that fact-based data to back you up and say, this doesn't align to strategy. This doesn't align to our guardrails around internal, external resources. This doesn't align to our guidelines around architecture. It's okay to be selective as long as you have those facts. If you don't have the facts, it makes it more challenging for you to be selective on those things that are going into it. So some basic intake criteria, when I like to always start off with, is my first thing I always want to start with is the intent and objective. Like, why are we doing this? Let's kind of keep the end in mind. What are our goals and the why? And a lot of times that includes some of your business case information. What's your return on investment? What's your IRR, your NPV? What's your kind of first dollar recoup? All those kinds of things. And then also the negative view. What if we don't do this? What's going to happen? Right? Are we going to be sued? We're going to lose a competitive advantage? Is this just customers expect this type of product? So those are things you want to look at. What's the risk of not doing? Again, there we go. Alignment to strategy, right? If we have strategy going this way, and now all of a sudden, if we have a strategy that says all our products should be made in the U.S., I'm just totally making this up. And now we're going out and saying, hey, I've got a great idea, but the only company that manufactures this is in Canada. Well, you're going to have to look, well, this is my strategy, this is our business goal and value, does this align with that? So you have to kind of look at that alignment to that strategy. Do you have a sponsor? Never start a project without a sponsor. Because that should be a given, right? But you never want to start, and then when you're looking at from a portfolio perspective, it's really challenging to manage a portfolio if you don't know who the sponsors are. So I have nobody to look at and say, I'm sorry, John Doe, we can't have any more initiatives in your area, you're over capacity. If I don't know who's sponsor of that initiative, I don't know where to put it. I don't know where it aligns to what those individual area goals are. It should be basic, but sometimes it's really challenging.
How hard do you push on getting beyond a nominal sponsor and to a real sponsor?
That is a fabulous question. So sponsorship is one of the biggest challenges, whether you're looking project management, program management, or portfolio management. The success of those projects directly correlates to whether you actually have an active sponsor versus someone whose name is on the paper. And it's me personally, and where I sit right now, we push really hard to have a single sponsor that is not just a name sponsor, that is an active, engaged, accountable sponsor. And by accountable, they're responsible for the delivery of the capability, they're responsible for the funding of that initiative, obviously not personally out of their pockets, but from wherever they sit within that organization. It is an evolution. We have several areas within that do not buy into that. They just want to put somebody's name, and the more powerful name they can put in there, the more oomph they think they have in that project. I've worked in companies that will absolutely reject something that comes through intake, or areas of business that will reject things that come in without a sponsor, or will validate that sponsor is signed up for this. So it's going to correlate back to your success. And again, it's being able to show facts. Hey, we have no sponsor for this. Who's owning this? Who's the accountable executive? Who's funding this? A lot of questions spawn down from if you don't have that sponsor. An initial risk assessment. A lot of times you'll go into, this is a chicken and egg conversation when you go through intake and those types of things. If I have a laundry list of initiatives that my company wants to get done, the company's going to look at it and say, wow, I don't want to spend all this time on detailed business cases for all these things that may never see the light of day. It's a lot of expense that we're putting on something that we may never do. So it's that balance of how much goes into that intake process. But initial risk assessment, how risky is this? And how does it fit within our profile? Resource and skill needs, again, very high level. When you're taking intake, people generally don't know, I'm going to need 10 Java developers, 2 DBAs, an enterprise architect, 4 change management resources. I need somebody from marketing who has a detailed knowledge of this type of, advertising. But you should have a general knowledge of these are the areas that are going to be impacted, and these are types of resources. And oh shoot, I don't have a XYZ type resource because this is new to our company. How are we going to get that? Are we going to go acquire that? What are our processes around that? Just having that high level understanding of what you need. And then the type of project, because not all projects are created equal, because it would make life so much easier if they were, right? You may look at an innovation project very differently than an infrastructure project. You may look at a small finance related initiative that's has huge benefit but within a small space versus a small project in another area that doesn't have the same amount of benefit. So it's really understanding the type of project that's also going to help you when you balance your portfolio. So this is kind of an ugly picture when it's up here on the screen, but it kind of shows that flow down. You're going to have tons of ideas, and having lots of ideas is okay, but it's how it gets through your intake and your prioritization process to get into your portfolio management space. And then from your portfolio management should go into some type of PMO or project management type space. You shouldn't expect your portfolio managers to now take off a hat, put on a different hat, and start executing against projects, so then nobody's watching the store and nobody's really looking at it from a holistic perspective. So now we've got intake, we've got all of our things waiting for us to get prioritized or start getting looked at. How do we know how to select what goes in the portfolio? So there's lots of different ways. There's no right way. What type of company you have, what your priorities are, how you identify priorities can all go into this. But at some point, you need to create some sort of narrowing it down, unless you don't have a lot of ideas and a lot of projects. And you also need to come up with some sort of roadmap or type of sequencing so people know when they're supposed to be working on these things. So again, for strategic alignment, priority, risk assessment, categorization are the most common criteria that we see when we're looking at how to select things for that portfolio. And say it again, strategic alignment, right? What is it you want to do as a company? What's your mission? What's the company's vision? And it may not be at the enterprise level. It may be within your own business unit or function if you're managing your portfolio from that perspective. What is it we set out to do? What's your current portfolio or industry model? What's the stuff that you already have going on, right? Because projects aren't really neat and clean. I wish they would start at the beginning of the fiscal year and end at the end of the fiscal year. That would be fantastic and make my life so much easier. It doesn't work that way, though. You look at all of your in-flight activities, whether you call it in-flight, you call it carryover, you call it stuff still going on. You need to kind of pull all that together and say, we got a bunch of new, we got a bunch of existing. How does that all come to play together? Some really more mature and sophisticated organizations have a stop button saying, well, this thing's been going on way too long. We got some new stuff coming in. I'm canceling this, starting this new. A lot of organizations don't have a stop button. Most of the organizations you work in do not have a stop button. We just keep going and going and going. So it's understanding what's still going, when it's planned to end, what's it going to deliver, and all that new stuff that's coming in. What are those, and then what are those capability gaps, right? Here's our goals, here's our objectives, here's what we want to do, here's all the new stuff coming in, we're still not meeting any of our objectives, what's going on? So having those conversations, again, fact-based, here's all the things we said we wanted to do, we're maybe doing like 3 or 4, and how do we get ahead of that and ensure that the projects that are coming in are going to meet those capabilities? I always like to say, though, I can't always say it, I always like to say the first failure criteria should be, if you don't align with strategy, you should kick it out. That happens not a lot, right? But it's a good litmus test to say, okay, senior leader or whoever's pushing this project forward, this does not align with strategy. Why should we do it? And that puts the onus back on them to really come up with the why. It could be, hey, this is a critical foundational piece of software, and we're five releases out of date. So it doesn't align with strategy, but if this thing goes down, we're dead in the water. Okay, yeah, we got to go do that, right? there's lots of less compelling reasons, but things still come up from that perspective. And there's lots of different ways that strategy can be developed. As a portfolio manager, you should know about them. You should know how your company is developing strategy. It should be something you're aware of, but sometimes you're asked to participate in those exercises, which is fantastic. If you're like me, you like to know everything that's going on. You like to see the sausage at the end, but you like to see the sausage being made, so you can kind of see how it comes out. But generally, this does not fall in the portfolio manager's space, because again, that portfolio manager should be that neutral party that's kind of looking and aligning. So now we got strategy. Now I want to look at risk, okay? How risky is this project, and how risky is your portfolio? Again, if you're in a startup, and when I used to work for a startup, everything was risky, because big risk, big payoff, right? And that's the only way you're going to make it as a startup. A much more established company, you want to take some risk, but if everything's in that high risk bucket, that's not good, right? You don't want to be taking that company down because you had all these great, fantastic ideas. So it's really, what is that risk reward ratio? And again, it varies. It's just good to know what it should be going in. A lot of times you don't, so it's always good to show it on the other side. Okay, this is what our portfolio looks like. Is everybody comfortable with? And if not, let's start pulling some of those levers. Just like your own financial portfolio, your goal should ultimately be, you don't put all your eggs in that one basket. You want to be able to distribute that risk by investing in a lot of different categories to ensure you kind of smooth out. Doesn't always happen. You don't always get the buy-in, but again, you want to provide that fact-based information. So one kind of portfolio risk view, and there's lots of different ways to look at it, is I don't know if you can see the axis. You have your reward, which is your value, and then you have your risk. And then the size of your bubble could be anything. So in this one, it's the size of the investment. And then we like to color code things because they align to different, different areas within a business. So if you're looking at this portfolio, you can make some decisions on what you're going to do. It's a good graphical representation, and it makes it easy for folks to consume. To say, okay, now I know I really don't want too many of those big red bubbles over there, because there may be, high risk, high reward. You want some of the smaller ones as well that are a little lower risk and still have some high reward, or maybe some of those low risk or even higher risk items, but you want to balance it. Again, unless you're doing some sort of upgrade or something that is just kind of run your business activity, you shouldn't see a lot of your low reward type things, especially high risk, low reward. That should be a flag to say, hey guys, we really shouldn't be doing this. And here's why. And then we factor in priority. There's lots of different ways to do priority. If you start at the very kind of bottom of the kind of maturity model scale, and this is the easiest one to do from a leadership perspective, the hardest one to manage from a practitioner perspective is high, medium, low, because every single thing is what? High, right? And you're like, is this one higher than that? Is this high, super high? And then you never do, then no one wants to classify something as low, because guess what? It's never getting done. So it's easy for folks to start thinking about things that way. It's really hard for us to manage that way. The second kind of you're moving up is stack rank. It's really hard for executives to do. It's really easy for us to manage, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? I'm going to start at the top and work my way down. And unless there's some sort of critical dependency, whether it's resources, architecture, you name it, I'm going to go in that order, right? But again, it doesn't help us from a value perspective, because the number one priority may be because somebody wants to do it, but the value may be low. Number 10 priority may have really high value, but we're just going to step right through it, and it makes it super easy for us. But it's not always good. And you have your budget base. So let's pick the one thing that everybody likes to pull on. It's finances, right? So we're going to pick off the stuff that's cheap to do. Let's just work our way through that, right? Or let's just say, here's our budget. This is all we got. So I'm going to pick the ones that fit within that budget. I have, $10 million. So how do I move the puzzle pieces? So what I deliver is $10 million worth of stuff. Again, you're looking at just one facet of your organization and value, not looking at that full picture. When you look at the top, which is the hardest and the most complex and most mature and the most controversial, is your scoring model. That's when you're looking at your multiple facets. There's lots of different scoring models. You can go out there, Google scoring model. You're going to have like pages and pages and pages. I generally start with kind of an Excel spreadsheet to look at scoring models. There's tools out there. There's more sophisticated ways to do it. Flat scoring model is much easier than a weighted scoring model. Flat scoring model, you give everything a score, and you can look across many different facets. The more facets you look across, the more complex it's going to be. But if you look at facets of risk, complexity, value, and give them a score, you have a raw score at the end, and that'll help you with the prioritization standpoint. You can do weighted scores as well if some things in your company have more value than the other. So a score of 1 has a power of whatever, whether it's risk, finance, etc. And that'll give you some of that more, again, fact-based prioritization, but it's really where you are on that maturity model. None of these are wrong. It's just going to give you a different view and a different lens. And it will help you step into it. If you're not doing anything, high, medium, low is probably the best way to start having those conversations with leaders. If you're doing that, take them up to, hey, can we rank some of these things? So then you get like your portfolio bubble chart where you can start looking at, here's all the different areas I'm looking at, my different facets. I'm weighted. I can kind of then make some decisions. I really like pictures, much easier than Excel charts for the most part. And then again, not all projects are created equal. You can't invest only in innovation unless you're a startup innovation company. But if you're an established corporation, you can't only invest in innovation. You should invest in some innovation, but not all. And on the same token, if all you invest in is infrastructure and your basic run the business type activities, you're never going to be innovative. You're never going to continue to stay up with your customers' needs and expectations. So it's being able to provide those categorizations so then you can balance your portfolio using some of those facets as well. We have our so this is a model that a lot of organizations use, kind of that whole run, grow, transform. It's not always equal. It's just what the chart gives you. So you need to decide from a company, where's your, how do you want to balance that? That's just one way to look at it, run, grow, transform. You can look at different areas of your business, however your company wants to use it. But to be able to show that portfolio view, everyone looks at their financial statements, same way, look at how your company wants to be distributed and what's your investment and what's your realization. Realization is really key when you're looking at your portfolio, is what's the benefit and when, how long is it going to take to get this benefit, and let's look at that as well when we're managing that portfolio. So now we've identified everything that goes, we know what a portfolio is, we've identified how things get into it, we've built our portfolio. Now we can go home, right? Now we got to manage it, right? Because you can create something, if you don't manage it, it's going to fall apart the second you turn around. So we want to make sure we put in some process. Everybody loves process, right? That's what we do. We're all process people. Let's go ahead and manage the portfolio. So you've aligned it, you planned it, you got to monitor it, make sure that you're doing what you say you're going to be doing. You got to measure, right? What are your metrics? Are we getting what we thought we were going to get? And then you have to adjust, because what I thought, if I don't get what I think I'm going to get, we can keep going down that path and I'm not going to get what I thought I was going to get, or you can adjust and say, hey, this isn't going where we thought it was going to go. Let's see if this is still acceptable. Let's see, do we want to put something else in this other place? Is there another program or project that'll help us get that balance and meet our goals? So we've got the triple constraints. Everybody knows our project management triple constraints, right? We've got our time, cost, scope. When we look at portfolio management, one way to look at it is by looking at value, time to value, and capacity, right? So capacity we talked about a little earlier. Capacity is our organization's ability to do something. Our value is what is it we're actually getting out of it. But a key component is time to value. Because if we're going to make $100 million on something, but it's going to take us 10 years, is that worth doing? Or if we can make $10 million in 1 year, let's go ahead and take that on. So it's that time to value that we want to look at. What are your desired outcomes and how do we get there? So another way to look at it, though, is from a slightly different lens. What are our goals? What is it that we want to achieve? What's our culture like? Is our culture going to help us get to where we want to achieve those things? And what's our maturity? We may have all of our goals in place. We may have the right mindset of our people to get there. But if we don't have the maturity, if we don't have our basic project management skills shored up, we're never going to be able to look at managing 15, 20, 100 projects as a portfolio. So it's really understanding where you are to make some of those right decisions on how you want to manage. And maturity is not, if you're, I say, well, we're so immature. It's not necessarily a bad thing. The good thing is knowing where you are, right? It's when you don't know where you are that's what I would say is something that is an opportunity for you to discover where it is you are and where you want to go. So now I'm putting myself in my portfolio manager seat. What are the things that I want to know when I'm looking holistically across our portfolio? I want to know what the intent is of those initiatives. So when I'm measuring and monitoring, I can know if they're staying true to that intent. I want to know my sponsorship, right? So we had somebody as a sponsor. Are they still here? Are they still in role? Are they still committed to doing this initiative? A lot of times people get really excited about stuff and they're signing up and they're putting their folks on it and they're good to go. Now we get 6 months, 8 months, 10 months, 12 months, 24 months in. Is that sponsor still committed? And if they're not, that's a big red flag to say, okay, what's going on? What are we doing? If they still are committed, fantastic. Let's understand why our program keeps going on and on. So that's where you get into the measure. But if you don't have that sponsorship and commitment, if it's not there, something that's a red flag from a portfolio management perspective. Alignment. Have our goals changed? Are we still aligned? And are we delivering on what we said we were going to deliver on? We like to deliver stuff, but we said we were going this way, but what we deliver is over here. So and we don't know that to the end, but if you're monitoring that throughout the duration, again, you're not managing the project, it's the project manager's job, but you need to be taking those health checks, those pulse checks throughout the way to say, are we still delivering what we said we were going to deliver? Yes.
What the cadence?
I'm sorry?
What's the cadence you use for monitoring?
So again, the question was, what's the cadence? And it depends. It depends on how big your portfolio is, what the tolerance is of folks getting that information, and what the maturity is of your organization, how many resources you have. Quarterly is what we see a lot. Monthly is optimal, but it depends on how invasive you're going to be. If you have your processes in place where you're non-invasive to your practitioners, even more frequently than monthly could be possible. That's maybe where that tool comes in. But if you don't have those processes in place, monthly or quarterly is probably a safer way to do it. Quarterly gets on the edge of not enough. Annually is not enough because you're going to miss out a whole lot of stuff that's going on within that space. Resource allocation and demand management is always the hairy 12-legged monster because the granularity of what resources are working on a day-to-day basis. I don't know how many conversations I have with folks that say, do not allocate your resources 40 hours a week. Please don't do that because you don't give them time to do anything else. How many meetings do we go to? How many off-site workshops do we have? How many vacation days do we have? How many times do you get sick? Do you get called into something? Everybody likes to eat lunch, go to the restroom. I have to do a PDP, with somebody and those types of things. But we like to, as a company, 1 FTE equals 40 hours. Being able to really look at what is our true demand against what we're actually planning our resources and understand what that impact is. Again, if you're doing it manually in spreadsheets, it's a little challenging and it's really invasive to our project managers. If you're kind of moving up the scale and you have some sort of tools or processes in place, it makes it less invasive and it gives you more of that view across what's going on. Measure, measure, measure. You always want to measure, but you need to know what you're measuring on. You can come up with numbers all day long, information overkill. You need to know what are those facets that are important to your leaders to measure on. Do they care about, costs? Assuming they do. So you're wanting to know where you are from a cost perspective. Do they want to know about value? So pick those things that are important from a leadership perspective or from a company perspective, and those are the things you really want to measure. If you look at status reports or other things, you can measure hundreds of different facets on a project that mean nothing to the overall success of your portfolio. Again, let your project managers deal with the, all of the details around the hourly, daily type impacts. You want to be looking holistically. If a project slips 3 months but has no additional cost and no downstream effects, really shouldn't matter. But if a project slips 1 month and your cost is going up, that could matter. If your project slips a month, your cost is the same, but now you're impacting all these downstream initiatives, things can't get started, that could be huge. So it's knowing which of those levers and what those impacts are. that make your job as a portfolio manager sometimes that much more stressful. But again, it allows you to look at the facts and understand what those impacts are. Funding and forecasting. So everybody loves forecasting, right? It's so much fun. We do it all the time. But that's what's going to help drive us to understand, are we over, are we under? Where are we over, where are we under, and what does it mean, right? If you're over in one area, under in another, does that compensate for each other or not? You need to have those answers to understand what that means. Funding, from a funding perspective, who owns it, who's accountable, and are they going to continue to be that revenue source for that initiative? If that leader has left their seat, that's a sponsorship conversation, right? You need to sit down and say, okay, who's going to carry this forward? And where's that coming from? And have we exceeded any of our thresholds? And what do we need to do? And that's where you need to be looking at those things. And my favorite is benefits realization. We love to deliver stuff, right? We're project managers. We love to deliver stuff. We get to the end, we delivered it. It's awesome. We didn't meet any of the things we said we were going to do. And it's not because we're not really good project managers, but the value may have diminished over time because it's no longer relevant in the marketplace. Or we've extended the timeline so much that we've kind of missed that critical window, or now our costs have exceeded where there's benefit to do this, or our competition beat us to it. So, constantly managing that benefits realization throughout the way and helping executives make those stop decisions, which I'll put out there is really, really hard. Folks don't like to make stop decisions. The smaller the company, the easier the stop decision is, in my experience. The larger the company, the harder the stop decision. You guys experience the same thing? Yeah. So I shouldn't have to tell you guys this, right? Better planning leads to better execution, right? We know that. This is live, eat, breathe, sleep this. And how many times we have these conversations with folks? Do not put the hand on the keyboard yet. We have not planned for this. Same thing works from a portfolio management perspective. The more planning you do around your portfolio, the better it's going to be executed. The more you take into consideration the broader view, understand what those impacts are, understand what those bottlenecks could be, understand what your dependencies are, and then report your variance to the plan, the better results you're going to get from your portfolio. It's not easy. If it was easy, right, everybody would do it. And you'll feel like you're having the same conversation with folks, which again, not a bad thing, where they say it takes 7 times for something to become a habit. And I think it sometimes takes 7 times to tell somebody something before they actually can internalize it and understand it. Sometimes you need to show them, whether it's a picture, whether it's a spreadsheet, whatever's going to resonate with them, to say, this is why we're doing this. So when you're managing the portfolio, again, it's your demand management, understand what you're working on, your key resources, what are they doing? If you've got 10 enterprise architects, or if you've got 15 program managers, those are your critical resources. Can't manage a program without a program manager. 100 project managers, 200 projects, probably not going to work. So really understanding what those key resources are. You don't want to offend anyone, tell them they're not a key resource, but Java developers are now commodity based, right? So if you don't have enough, you can get more. Project managers, we can argue whether they're a commodity or not. I personally think they're not a commodity. That's just me. Program managers, etc. Those are your critical resources. Architects, sometimes your DBAs. What if you don't have that person in the seat? You cannot do this program or this project. Financial management, you want to make sure that your project managers are managing the financials. Oops, sorry, there we go, risk. Financial management, risk management, and all the things we've been talking about, it's actively getting managed. It's not a one and done when you're setting up your portfolio. You should have some processes that your project managers are following. If not, if you don't have processes for project managers to manage risk, you cannot manage risk at the portfolio level. You can try, you can say you are, but where are you getting your data from? Is it consistent? Is it following the same process? You need to have all of those building blocks in place first before you can look at it from a top-down perspective. So now we get to my favorite part, governance. We love governance, right? Because if you don't have governance, you can't fix what you don't see, right? If you don't see it, you don't know about it, you can't help fix it. So I do a lot, personally, in my role, we do a lot of governance. Not everybody is my bestest friend about this. They see me coming and they kind of duck, right? It's like, oh, I owe you something. I'm like, yep, you do. But that's just the way it is. But you need to have that governance, and governance is not again not a bad thing. You're not walking around hopefully smacking people upside the head because they're not doing what you need them to do, but it's really putting in place that process and that structure to manage your portfolio. If you don't have those processes in place, you don't have the structure, and you don't have the sponsorship to manage that. You can have all the process you want, you can have all the structure. If you don't have the sponsorship to manage it that way, you're never going to be successful. Again, it's those building blocks to build into it. You want to leverage those governance forums for something. It should never just be a readout like of 1,500 status reports. You'll put everybody to sleep, and there's no value, right? Red, green, yellow. Okay, move on next, right? But it's really, what are we doing? Are we going to make any decisions? Hey, this program has been red for 3 months. What are we going to do about it in a governance forum? Okay, it's red because XYZ. We got it resolved. We're moving it out. We're good. It's been red for 3 months because the vendor hasn't shown up. Well, that's a problem. Why do we wait 3 months? But now we know a vendor didn't show up. What are we going to do? Cancel the contract, get their executives in here. Let's make this, what's the impact to the rest of our portfolio? Those governance forums should be decision and recommendation-based forums. It should not just be a readout. Again, you're wasting folks' time, and everybody can read a status report, right? They're fantastic. But coming out of that, we want to produce something, right? Because we shouldn't have 100 people in these governance review meetings. It should be that group of folks that can action, make decisions, and make recommendations. We're going to need to be having some sort of cadence of readout. We want the rest of the organization, for the most part, to know where we are and following our portfolio. You may have rules within your organization if it's a strategy-based portfolio. You may not share it out. You may just share it within your specific business unit, and that's okay. You want to be able to produce something that folks can read and leverage and know what to do with. And again, it's that portfolio level dashboard, not the project. Project managers manage the project. Projects can go from red to yellow to green to all sorts of things happen in them. But unless it's going to impact the portfolio, I'm concerned about it because I'm concerned about my company and I want things to go well. But where I am in role, it's not something that as a portfolio manager you should be concerned about. But in order for that to be effective, your leadership team needs to be really on board, and they need to be kind of sponsoring the creation of action plans and alternative scenarios. If you're going to create a portfolio and you've created a plan to execute against that portfolio and it becomes locked in stone, there's no management, right? That's just the way it is. But if you have a leadership team or sponsorship organization that's going to be open to actively managing that portfolio, that's where you're going to see that success. And that's where that governance component comes into play. So when portfolio governance fails, because Dilbert is awesome for project managers. I'm sure this has never happened on any of your projects, right? Because we have the processes in place, but you're like, this thing is tanking, it's the worst thing I've ever done, it stinks to all get out. Then the manager comes along, oh, it's great, we're doing great. If you don't have those governance processes in place and you don't have a culture that supports the governance, your portfolio is just going to be a nice, pretty picture that you look at on an annual basis. So portfolio management really needs your portfolio managers, your program managers, your project managers working together. So many times I see these groups working against each other because I'm a project manager. I don't want to tell the PMO what I'm doing because they might not like it. Or they may tell me I'm doing it wrong, or I got it covered. I got it. You don't need to worry about it. And from a PMO perspective, they're like, yeah, we own this. We're good. Keep moving. Nothing to see here. And from a portfolio management perspective, a lot of folks take that governance sometimes a little too far. So it's really, what's that balance and how do we all work together? Because you can't have the strategic without the tactical, right? If anyone's ever sat in a room with a whole bunch of folks that are strategists, it's great conversation, but you walk out of the room and you're like, now what, right? Or you can have a room of people that are all tactical, and you have folks that are doing all this stuff and they're getting all those individual tasks done, but they don't see the big picture and they don't really understand what we're getting to. So these groups all have to work together. So I'm hoping this picture resonates. To say, from a portfolio management perspective, that group is either going to be selecting the right things to do or helping plan out, these are the right things to do. Your project management and your program management, they're doing the right things to get your projects done. And your portfolio is measuring and reporting out to say where we are from a variance perspective and ensuring that those right things get done. Ensuring that we don't have too many of those shiny objects happening out there. So when these groups work together, it works really beautifully. But when they don't work together, you're going to have a lot of breakdowns, breakdown in communication, breakdown in expectations, and breakdown in results. And it's not easy, it's hard, right? So we need to crawl before we walk, and sometimes I even think we need to roll over first, right, before you even crawl. And then you need to learn to crawl, and we got that down, good. Let's start walking, and then let's start running. So many times we see folks get really enamored with whatever is new, or hey, this can solve so many problems, and yes, it can. So we jump into running first, and we still can't roll over. And then we wonder why we're not successful, because we haven't put those foundational pieces in place to ensure those successes. So do we have any roadmaps in place? Do we have a strategy? I know you guys will be like, stop talking strategy. Do we have a strategy? Do we have sponsors and key decision makers identified? Sometimes I think the worst thing, or what's worse than having a nominal sponsor or no sponsor on a project, is like 3 sponsors on a project, right? Because then there's zero decision making occurring, because there's a lot of this, right? And you're going to come up with a lot of gaps, because you got 3 people that are sponsoring it, and they're only looking at it from their functional hat, and you're going to miss a lot of things. So getting those sponsors and key decision teams identified. Do we have cross-functional teams that can work together, right? Do we live in silos, or do we live in an organization where we can talk? Whether it's business and IT, whether it's 2 departments within IT, whether it's the PMO and the portfolio team. Can we communicate and work together? And do we have those processes in place? If you don't have process in place, if you just assume people know what to do, you're not going to be successful. A lot of folks say, we got a lot of really smart people, everybody knows what to do. Okay, but they've come from company A, company B, company C, and we all do things a little bit differently. How do we do it here? What are those processes? And let's ensure we're following those processes, and that we have the governance in place so that we can get where we need to go. I've got a lot of pictures, so I think you guys can get the slides, but there's just a lot of studies out there that show that if you don't have a lot of these in place, I don't know if you can see the numbers, you've all heard like X percentage of projects fail, right? And let's talk about the why. It's if we don't have those maturity processes in place, it's not because we're bad people or your people don't know what to do, they don't know how to do it. And the more you move up that continuum by having a PMO, by having standardized practices, by having some of that mature capability, by sponsorship and alignment, the more success you're going to enable. Kind of like this picture, because a lot of us fall in the chasm, right? It's the whole norming, forming, storming, and performing from a PMO perspective. So if you're at a maturity, and if you do, it's always nice and reflective to do maturity model assessments on yourselves. They're not that hard to do. It's just being able. The hardest part is getting all the people's schedules and booking a conference room sometimes, or get on the phone to understand where you are from a process perspective. Maturity level 1, and if I'm sure you've seen these maturity models before. It's where does the breakdowns occur? You see a lot of momentum when people are forming in that maturity model 1, and even getting into 2. It's really hard to go from 2 to 3. You really can't start thinking about putting those portfolio management capabilities in place until you're at least into a level 3 from maturity model perspective. So you got to jump the chasm, and a lot of us fall into the chasm. But it's how do you, understanding where you want to go and how to get there will lead to that success. But having those building blocks in place will help get you there. There's also, because there's a maturity model for everything, right? There's Gartner has their portfolio management model, and it's very similar. It's again, are you working in an organized way? Are you tracking costs on your projects? That's just your level 1. You're tracking costs and you're tracking things project by project. As you move into level 2, if your projects are compiled into some sort of portfolio, may not be organized, may not be aligned, but you can have some sort of view of your portfolio, and your responsibilities are assigned. So people are looking at more than a project, they're looking at things more in program or from a portfolio view. And we're starting to look about ranking our projects. You're moving into level 3, you've got your metrics defined, right? You're starting to look from that. You're getting a little more specialized. You may be pulling in a PPM tool. There's lots of tools out there. So those are some of those things as you move up that maturity model. So knowing where you are is really important. And if you're low on the scale, again, it's not a bad thing, but it shows you where you are. And then it's also where do you want to be, right? Not everybody is going to be a 5. And I would argue not everybody should be a 5. It depends on your industry, your organization. A portfolio management consulting firm should absolutely be a 5, right? If you're a manufacturing company, your strengths are going to be likely in other areas. So it's okay if you're a 3 and if you strive to be a 4, or even if you're a 2 and strive to be a 3. It's understanding where you fall and what your goals and desires are. I talk to a lot of people who always want to be 5, right? Because we're overachievers and we want to be the best we can be, but it's understanding what's the best we should be and what's good enough, because what great is the enemy of good, right? So I save tools for last because we love tools, right? So I can't say this enough, and I've worked at so many companies that have bought really great tools because there's so many great tools out in the marketplace. People come out of these companies like, that was the worst tool ever. I'm never using that again. Had absolutely nothing to do with the tool. It had everything to do with the way the tool was implemented and the fact there were no processes in place before the tool came in, because we love tools that are going to solve all of our problems. They don't. They actually can exacerbate your problems. They're going to solve some of your problems, though. They're really, really powerful. If you look at tools now, they've grown. If you haven't looked at them in a while, they're absolutely fabulous. They do so many really cool things. But you need to, a little knowledge can be dangerous. They can really help manage some of the challenges we've been talking about, like the ability to view and manage all of your investments, all of your projects in one place. And it's not just project investments, right? You may have other investments that you're looking at that are non-project, and the ability to look at them across, holistically in one place and roll up, roll down, slice, dice. It gives you a really good view. There's workflows built in, right? Some of us use SharePoint, some of us pass papers around, we save emails down. There's these tools also help from a workflow perspective. There's so many more things than I've listed, but just some of the challenges we see: resource allocation and skill demand, being able to forecast our needs and know kind of where our gaps are going to be and make those adjustments. Program health, financials, you name it, you can manage within a tool. But the risks, right? All the good comes with the bad. Tools should enable your project portfolio management. You need to know your goals going in. So if you sit down with a tool vendor, they'll sell you all sorts of stuff, right? But they should be giving you advice and understand what your processes are within your organization. And if you don't have that, that's probably a good time to take a step back and say, hey, we need some process here first before we bring in this tool. Because if you've got no process or bad process in place, your tool implementation is going to fail. You will not have adoption, or if you do, it won't get you what you expected to get out of it. So you really need to work and understand where you are, what are your goals, what are you trying to get out of a tool. There's so many tools out there that look at things just a little differently and understand what it is you want. Are you really focused on the top down? Do you want to see that portfolio view, executive dashboards, mobile, iPad type dashboards, or are you really looking to manage bottoms up? I want to know what my resources are doing. I need to understand from a time entry perspective. I need to know my internal, my external resources. What's my cost per head? Those types of things. What your goals are going to help drive how you design, how you select your tool, and how you work with your tool. And again, I always say data in, quality out. You can put a lot of stuff in a tool, but if the practitioners don't know how to leverage the tool, they don't know the impact of what they put in, they can manage whatever they want in their own internal spreadsheets. When they turn that into a status report, it's going to look very different than what's on their spreadsheet, right? Or if they have Microsoft Project local on their machine. Once you start leveraging a tool, whatever they put in, you can see. So they need to understand what that means, what those impacts are, and what kinds of fire drills that they can cause for folks who are trying to manage things at month end, quarter end, year end, those types of things. And then change management. If anybody went to Mindy Bostic's talk earlier today, you can't forget the impact of the change management. And I'm not talking again about the CRs or the change requests, the people change management. I've done it this way all my life as a project manager. It works great for me. I don't want to put anything in that tool. Or I'm just going to put in that. I'm still managing all my stuff over here, but I'm going to put something separate in that tool because I know that's what you want to see. And so you're not going to get out of it what you want. So I know we all work for organizations that love tools. We love tools, we do. But let's make sure we know what we're getting ourselves into before we go down a tool path. And then real quick before we close, 3 barriers. There's probably a lot more, but if I had to pick like my top 3 list, I'm not going to do the Dave Letterman top 10, but the Lisa Slonim top 3 barriers to portfolio management adoption. Sponsorship. If you don't have sponsorship to manage a portfolio with fact-based information and fact-based decision, you will not be successful. You absolutely need that sponsorship. If you don't have a strategy, you're not gonna be successful. You need to know what you're aligning to, and it doesn't need to be this holistic, lofty enterprise strategy. It could be within your functional area, your business unit, or your organization. To say these are our goals. This is what we're trying to get to, and skills. You need to have the people skills to be able to, from a project and program management and a portfolio management proficiency, to be able to manage those initiatives. So I pulled a bunch of stuff. PMI has an awesome white paper on portfolio management. It's a little bit old now. I think it's maybe 2 or 3 years old. So in our terms, right, that's starting to get old. But they did a huge questionnaire around what makes things effective and not effective. It's a great read, and it's out in the, if you are a PMI member, you can go right out there and pull it down. It really talks in some really easy to understand terms why things are successful and why things fail around sponsorship, strategy, and skilled practitioners. So it really gives you, again, I don't know the organizations y'all sit in, my leadership likes data. Like, why are we doing this? What's everybody else doing? How can we do it differently? How can we do it better? Why aren't we doing this now? Remind me, what's going on? So we can really sit down and give them some of that fact-based data to help with decisioning. So some key takeaways I hope you take with you. Project portfolio management is a key process to enable organization success. It's really important, but you need to know what the building blocks are in place to get there. Clear corporate goals and strategy. I know, I'll stop talking about strategy. Are really important to have the guardrails for that portfolio. You need to understand multiple facets when you're looking at your portfolios. It's not just a one single view. The project, program, and portfolio management roles are clear, distinct disciplines. You will not be successful if you want folks to play multiple roles at the same time across those disciplines. It's not the same skill, the same profile, nor the same job or career path for those folks. Governance is ultimately important in executing. If you set something out there and don't manage and govern against it, you're not going to be successful. Keep in mind where you are in maturity model curve to say what we can do. If you try to overshoot yourself, you'll be out over your skis and you won't be successful. You know, work within that crawl, walk, run capacity. And tools are awesome. They provide great automation, but they can be dangerous. So you need to know what you're getting into before you leverage them. That's all I got. Thank you, guys. I appreciate you being here this afternoon on the tail ends of this conference. If you have any questions, feel free to ask or come see me afterwards. Thanks for having me.